Hi, everyone. This is Natasha Treneff, and I'm so delighted to have Dr. Betty Murray here today. We're going to be talking about hormones and their interaction with the microbiome and try to come up with some sensible solutions to the problem that young women are seeing more often than not, at least in my generation. Irregular menstrual cycles, infertility, infections that alter their mood and their ability to have a fun, good time. I'll let Dr. Betty start and from her perspective and what she's seen in her practice, and then we can go from the microbiological point of view.
Sure. Thank you, Natasha. You can just call me Betty. So one of the things that I've noticed over the last 20 years is, I came to this industry, I came to the field of nutrition and functional medicine really actually from an autoimmune diagnosis. And, when I first started my practice 20 years ago, that's really where it was focused. And I started to have a very big interest, obviously, in the microbiome and its relationship to our immune system and how that works. And then I hit my 40s and I personally started having problems. And that really drew me back to school to do my PhD and then the research that we're going to talk about tonight. And the thing that I've noticed, particularly in the last 10 years, is just the extraordinary amount of hormonal changes that we see, both in young women with infertility and changes in their ability to get pregnant and hold a pregnancy and all of the symptoms that may go along with that. But then I would say that we also have a menopausal crisis on our hands because we have a lot of women now that are really dealing with health problems that are related to their hormones. But the myopic view of the medical system is to apply a prescription and not really look at the whole person. And we've got, our gut and everything else that's all part of it. And it is a big problem.
Yeah, well, I've been studying vaginal health for at least 40 years. And I had the privilege to work with Yale Nursing School. And they had severe vaginal yeast overgrowth. And before they even got wind of what was L. acidophilus, believe it, in that era, most doctors didn't even know what Lactobacillus acidophilus was. So at any rate, I did supply my specific strain of Lactobacillus acidophilus, which was used by these women in this study to curtail yeast overgrowth in these HIV positive women. And the other subgroup was using metronidazole, which, as you know, is a antifungal agent. And to everyone's surprise, and including my own, R. acidophilus performed as well as the drug without causing any other side effects. In fact, the women would come in and ask for it, and they used it in literally less than half the dose amount I was recommending because they said they had a problem with compliance, which shocked me. I said, "You've got HIV and you're not complying? My goodness."
Right.
So what we found is that, these lactobacilli are smart organisms, and they want to inhabit the part of the body that is allowing it to grow its own kind and proliferate and, sort of dominate its territory. And through the decades, I have seen this reduction of, the proper lactobacillus in our vaginal and in our cervix, in our ovaries, in our fallopian tubes. They're everywhere, even in our bloodstream. When this reduction happened, it also had an influence on the hormone production because it's a bilateral interaction. The hormones will stimulate certain bacteria, and for instance, estrogen is more prone to increasing the pro-inflammatory organisms, whereas progesterone is there to increase the viability of more non-inflammatory organisms. So, in general, probiotics such as specifically Lactobacillus acidophilus is an incredible tool for increasing progesterone naturally. And progesterone, as we all know, reduces gut inflammation and improves the gut microbiome balance. And so it's an interaction. Remember what I said? And allowing the healthy hormone production, which is great because it's a hand in glove. And the Lactobacillus acidophilus also improves insulin sensitivity, which has the downstream effect of better hormone balance. So it's an intelligent interaction with the body because this organism evolved with Homo sapiens, and it's been in the literature for well over 100 years with more than 10,000 articles and clinical trials published. So you want to make sure you're using an organism that is safe, that is effective, and that will only benefit the human host.
Absolutely. So you've got the vaginal canal and you've got the changes with the hormones and the kind of crosstalk between that and the microbiome. But, I think the gut doesn't get its fair due. We think about a lot of the symptoms that you get with hormone changes, whether it's anxiety, depression, PMS symptoms, abdominal bloating, all of those things, everybody associates just completely with the hormones themselves, right? Because we know our hormones fluctuate and we get to that, 7 to 10 days before your cycle starts, we start to have a lot more symptoms because that's when the hormones are really fluctuating. But inside your gut, your bacteria in your gut influence the availability of those hormones, how much are available, what they're doing, whether they get excreted properly or not. And even the same enzyme pathways, so the same things that affect the levels of your hormones that your bacteria produce, also change your neurotransmitter activity. So things like serotonin, your feel-good stuff, dopamine in the gut itself are all subject to changes by the microbiome. And it's just, generally ignored. And it's
one of the other major functions of the gut and the hormone cycle is that if you have a healthy gut microbiome, it helps to recycle the hormones. And as you get older, you get hit twice. You're now not producing as many hormones, and you're excreting more hormones because your gut is unable to recycle the proper amount of hormones to help your body. And most doctors, I've worked with OBGYNs throughout my career, they don't understand this. And the ones who are more humble and the more educated they are, the more humble they are, they did listen to me because it's not something taught in medical school. That, this imbalance, so you can't just balance the vaginal tract by itself. Well, you can, but it's not the optimal choice. The optimal choice is to balance both the small, the large intestine, your mouth is the beginning of your intestinal tract, your vaginal tract, and then everything starts working in harmony. Because, we talk about progesterone supplementation, bioidentical hormones, and I think this is all helpful, but I see it too much being employed. Because if everything was working right, why would we have to use that?
Yeah. I mean, so there's, if you look at human lifespan, so in 1900, our average lifespan was about 57 years. So we're unique in the mammal world to survive significantly after fertility. And you're right. The enzyme that I studied in my dissertation, what I'm studying, is an enzyme produced by bacteria, certain strains of bacteria, mostly pathogenic, but not all pathogenic bacteria. And when the bacteria overproduce it, it allows not only your estrogens to get recirculated. So basically imagine your body is wrapping your estrogen that you've used. You're done with it. It's no longer functional. You've got to basically take it and get it ready for the trash and throw it out. Well, it basically unwraps that trash and allows it to get thrown back into the bloodstream, but it also can recycle things like your environmental toxins, things like pesticides, herbicides, phthalates, BPA. So all of those things are estrogenic as well, and they're subject to that recirculating activity. So what's interesting is when there's very high levels of this enzyme, it's called beta-glucuronidase. That's a buzzword bingo word for everybody, but it's made by bacteria. And when you have a lot of it, it's been associated with things like breast cancer, colon cancer, ovarian cancer. But if you have none, that doesn't also bode well because it's also there to act as a reservoir to recycle your healthy hormone ability back into the bloodstream. And so it's this weird catch-22. And a lot of the bacteria that we see overgrow today that produce this are pathogenic bacteria that often survive antibiotic use. bad diet and other things. And so they thrive in an unhealthy kind of garden.
Right. You're right. Nobody has to remember the enzyme name. And what I'm trying to tell everybody, various enzymes are produced by the bacteria either to dominate their territory or to harm the human host or to help the human host. The pathogens are trying to take advantage of us, and the beneficial bacteria are trying to protect us, not because they love us so much, but we're the best environment for them to thrive. So the reduction of this enzyme is imperative to a point where it does not harm the human host, but doesn't allow it to harm the other way, where it's producing these procarcinogenic compounds and allowing, certain bacteria to start forming biofilms. Interestingly enough, this bacteria can sense something called quorum sensing. And quorum sensing is when bacteria get together and start talking to each other in their ability to form a biofilm. And when this quorum sensing is interrupted, then the biofilm is not allowed to form. Okay, so that's very important. This is where the Lactobacillus acidophilus is imperative, because it can sense this quorum sensing going on and stop it. And that's another function of progesterone, because it aids, because it creates this anti-inflammatory condition that also aids the Lactobacillus acidophilus to further, reduce the inflammation, which will then stop this quorum sensing and this ability to build the biofilms.
Yes, because you want the good bacteria building their own castle, not the bad bacteria.
Right. And so why is this important to us? Because look, in our both hormones, estrogen and progesterone, influence the immune function. Okay. So when there's no intervention in their ability to influence immune activity, and when immune activity is overstressed, that's when inflammation happens. And that unfortunately happens when you have too much estrogen. Estrogen happens to stimulate immune function, but overstimulation causes inflammation, which leads to other disease states. So what it is that all of these functions in the body have to be in an optimal balance. The signaling between the microbes and the hormones has to be perfect in order for the body to maintain its health and not allow cancers to form. Because I want to just teach everybody that your body loses about 10,000 cells a minute. So if you're not producing what I call good proteins, you're producing cheap proteins, your body can't produce hormones, can't produce new cells. And the production of cheap proteins leads to all kinds of disease, including cancers that are then stimulated or abated by the level of hormone production.
No, that's absolutely true. Yeah. I think one of the challenges that most women might face, because I'm assuming you probably have a predominantly female crowd that might be watching this, but there's probably some men as well. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them may be in their, let's say 40s and 50s and looking at hormone replacement and looking at, should I do that? Should I not? And I think one of the things that women can really look at is taking that extra step and having a little deeper dive in what's going on in the gut, what's going on with their microbiome, because at the end stage, that has an impact on how your drugs are metabolized, not just hormone replacement, but many of your drugs are impacted by what's going on in the gut. And I think a lot of times practitioners miss that, and miss all those pieces, and they miss looking for what's the lactobacillus, family look like? What's the bifido family look like? It's Clostridia overgrown. Some of those bacteria that we should have, but they should be balanced with each other.
That's correct. I'm just looking for the article that says estrogens and infection. And it says the multiple effect of estrogens on infectious process are only beginning to be understood. So estrogens do stimulate infections in the body. Yeah. And there's all kinds of cancers associated well, not just Clostridia, but Bacteroides, other groups
Hmm.
of bacteria form. And then you have your range of cancers. And I have this chart that tells you all the cancers that can be formed because of irregular bacterial unity or balance and
Yep.
the dominance of estrogen. So they talk about breast cancer and the gut microbiome, menopause and the gut microbiome. By the way, when you do have menopause, your hormone composition resembles more of a male than a female.
Absolutely.
And so you have cervical cancer in the gut microbiome, ovarian cancer in the gut microbiome. Gee, the microbiome is involved in everything.
Hmm.
Healthy female gut microbiome is a lower Bacteroides abundance. By the way, Bacteroides fragilis is also implicated in Crohn's disease, which is interesting.
Yes, very much.
So you always have menstruation in the gut microbiome, pregnancy in the gut microbiome, PCOS, which is interesting, and the gut microbiome. And that's where that insulin resistance factor comes to play, because a lot of Eastern European women suffer from polycystic ovarian syndrome, which, as you know, causes infertility and the dominance of testosterone, where their breasts can't grow and they get sort of hairy bodies, which is not fun.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying that's why I wanted to read this, because I didn't want to miss anything. So all of your female health problems rest on your ability to produce the right amount of estrogen, the right amount of progesterone, the right amount of testosterone, because women do produce testosterone, and the ability for that communication to happen with the microbiome, and that unity creates the optimal balance for the human health and for the well-being of the person. Really, cancer should be very rare in our society, and unfortunately, it's not. In fact, I just read some data, which I have to cite, that this year, 2024, we're expecting an additional 2 million uh, uh, cancers. They're not identifying the cancers in our society. So that's huge. And
Yep.
unfortunately, a lot of people are being diagnosed not in stage 1 or 2. They're all, when they present, they're already at stage 3 and stage 4. And
Right.
this is why I think your practice is so indispensable, especially to young women, because we're seeing younger women with ovarian and other forms of cancers in the reproductive system.
Yes,
Cervical
definitely.
cancer. I don't know what the numbers are, but I know that the numbers are growing.
They are. They are. And even obviously the cancer numbers are growing and it's toxins and all those other things that overwhelm the pathway, but even autoimmunity, you know, when I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, it wasn't necessarily unheard of, but it wasn't nearly as prevalent as it is today. Depending on who you look at, there's an assumption, we assume that there's about 50 million people in the United States that have an autoimmune condition, many of which have more than one. And a huge percentage of those people don't know because they haven't been able to get to the right person that can help diagnose that. But it's 10-to-1 female to male.
Yeah.
And you're more likely to experience that when you're at a hormonal change in your life, like pregnancy, perimenopause, onset of menses. So we see like in sexual maturation in your early, late teens, early 20s. And it really is this, the hormones are part of it. Your immune system doesn't really know what to do. And then if the microbiome is not a healthy microbiome, it's not regulating that immune system as well. And
Mhm.
so, all of that to me is an epidemic. And in our Western medicine, where we silo everybody into specialties. And it's like you see your gastroenterologist, you see your primary care, you see your whatever specialist. Never do those people talk. Even if you're critically ill, I can promise you they don't talk. I've gone through it in my own experience, taking care of my family members. So it's not like they get together and do grand rounds and figure out what they need to do. They take care of their piece and then they hand you back. And so nobody's looking at the full picture. And that's really where like functional medicine plays a role, and looking at deeper and trying to get to that root cause first and then fix the underlying problem, which is using things like probiotics and other things to help fix
Yeah.
the gut.
Well, and I will get to the use of probiotics because I introduced the whole category of probiotics in 1982. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, even my probiotic labeling standard that was read into congressional record is not followed by anybody. Really, when 99% of the products sold are not produced by the people selling them, and microbiology is rocket science, especially probiotics, I get concerned, and that's why I'm still working. It's not about the money. It's not about anything else. I'm very concerned because microbes are one-celled brains. They're very smart, and you have to know which ones you're using, what you're using them for, and what's the objective. And so this is where I'm concerned. Like you're right, most medical doctors are clueless. They'll look at a probiotic label and they think, oh, it's got a lot microbes listed. That's terrific. Well, that's the furthest thing from the truth, because the number one condition that microbes want is they want dominance, and they focus on competitive exclusion. Okay, so you have to know which beneficial bacteria you're using, how much of that beneficial bacteria, and is it going to survive storage, transportation, gastric acids, and bile. If it doesn't do that, it's not going to do you any good. I don't care what they list in the box or in the package. And really, the situation is quite serious. It's serious with young people. It's serious with the amount of cancers I see. And by the way, the autoimmune disease is out of control. And in very short term, I'm going to explain to people why, females are more susceptible. They think it's because of the estrogen, more susceptible because somehow estrogen does encourage the growth of some pathogens. And that's another, topic for in-depth discussion. So when a pathogen is allowed to overgrow, it does two things. It'll produce the toxin that'll destroy some part of your immune system or your cellular structure. And then we call that an autoimmune disease. The second thing it does is it misdirects immune function so that it attacks the body rather than the offending organism. And that's all any autoimmune disease is. We just give it different names, but people really don't understand how it happens. That there's a very intricate, it's almost more spectacular than any science fiction film you've ever seen. And I said, if you think Star Wars had a lot of firepower, these bacteria communicate with each other and with your immune cells through photon light emission. So they're emitting photons rapidly, communicating with each other and communicating with the immune cells on your intestinal wall. And that communication can be disrupted because bacteria have their own bag of tricks, and they're always looking to take advantage of their territory. And the pathogens will take advantage of you and will cause the disease. And it's as simple as that. And unfortunately, in the United States, since we have 80% of our $4.3 trillion so-called healthcare budget spent on chronic disease, we're not making any strides forward.
Yeah, none at all.
And so I think people like you are essential, especially to young women, to understand that it's not just about vaginal health, it's about total body health. And because of the situation, I had the privilege to work with the head of obstetrics and gynecology at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, Dr. Calvin Hobel, who's semi-retired and could be fully retired by now. So about 30 years ago, he and I devised both an oral supplementation with the acidophilus and the vaginal insertion by making a paste of my powder and digitally inserting it vaginally by having a sanitary condition, using filtered water, using gloves or finger cots. And it really takes less than 15 minutes. People say, oh, it's not convenient. Well, you want the bacteria alive. If you want them to help you, you have to meet their criteria, not your need to have something that's simple. I don't know if that makes sense to people, but I said, I'm not here to make it easy for you. I'm here to make it work.
Yeah.
So that's a big problem we have with our young people that they don't understand. So I do have that available. It's, it's a 5-day, could be a 2-week cycle where you insert this vaginally. But boy, I tell you, every young woman needs it. And there's another thing. A young woman came to ask me, and her friend was involved in having multiple partners. And I said, look, I'm not making a moral judgment on your friend, but I said, frankly, her body and her microbiome can't take it, because every time you have this contact with another person, you share their microbiome.
Mm-hmm.
And your body's not equipped to handle with so many people, that exchange of fluids and body contact. And I am going to get graphic, because I'm telling people, look, your immune system can't take it. It cannot take it. And that's why you're not feeling good and you're seeing all this illness.
Yeah.
And I'm saying you have to start thinking wisely that, you have trillions of cells in your body. You have trillions of cells everywhere in your body, including your brain. There's even bacteria in your neurons in your brain. So when these bacteria are everywhere, they're shared with everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I see it a lot in clinic where, women have, let's say, chronic UTIs, chronic vaginal infections, and everything else. And I'm like, you're passing your microbiome back and forth. We have to work on both people. We have to work on both people if you have a sexual partner, whoever that partner may be.
Yeah, and I tell, listen, I helped people during the AIDS crisis, and I could tell you, if I wrote a tell-all book, it'd probably be on the bestseller list. So, but anyway, what I'm saying is that there's another thing. If somebody's just asking about NAD, I think NAD is okay, and for aging, but it's an additional thing. I'm telling people that people are into these, what I call designer supplements. The designer supplements are good, but the most important thing is to fix your vaginal microbiome, to fix your oral microbiome, to fix your skin microbiome, and most importantly, to fix your gut microbiome. Because I tell people your body is the most magnificent biological machine ever invented. And it has the ability to heal itself because it's reproducing itself every year. And any of these other, what I call designer supplements, are an addition. But if you fix your microbiome and you still feel like you need these additional things, then it's okay to use them. But it's not a first choice. And I tell people we have to stop mimicking the orthodox medical community who gives us a drug for a symptom. In the alternative health industry, we're about giving the body the tools to heal itself. And we need to only give things when they're necessary. And I also told people that, 40, 50 years ago, you didn't have to take a probiotic supplement every day because we didn't have 100 types of chemicals and toxins in the air, the food, and the environment. We didn't have pesticides that were originally patented as very potent antibiotics and that were everywhere in our food. In fact, what was that data I saw? 80% of urine samples across America have a residue of glyphosate. Glyphosate.
Yes.
And so we have to stop, just looking for quick fixes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, if you look at the oral NAD kind of supplements, the precursors and everything, the research, I would say, is equivocal. It kind of goes both ways. It's some advantage, some less. And IV NAD, intramuscular NAD, but it's an expensive thing if the other baseline things aren't addressed.
Well, and I see my lovely Tara, she's asking me that it helps with mitochondria production.
Yes.
Well, look, it depends on the supplement. It depends if your body can utilize it, because your mitochondria is going to be produced every time your body replaces the cellular structure. Yes. And so this is what I'm telling people. Having sat for 10 years on standards committees with the National Nutritional Foods Association, I can tell you that every time we tested every supplement across the country, we found 80% didn't meet their label declaration. That's one problem. The second problem is how bioavailable is that supplement that you're taking? Just because we give it a name doesn't mean that our body will recognize it and be able to utilize it to do. And that's what I'm saying, that in our alternative healthcare industry, we have to really start having experts in each field determine which supplements are actually bioavailable and which are not. Doesn't matter what we call them. If you have the right microbiome and you eat the right food, everything that your body needs will be produced because the body was not designed to be defective. The problem is with the modern society is that because of the toxins, because of what we've done to our GI tract, and the fact that only 7% of the women in North America can give the right beneficial bacteria to their newborn infant, even if it's born vaginally and breastfed, is part of the explosion that we have of childhood illness. It's also related to everything, to hormonal imbalance, to proper development, for neural development, you name it. This is a big problem that we have destroyed the foundation of our health because the only thing that our body can't produce is more microbes. It can produce any chemical that it needs if it's given the right tools. And it can produce it in the right amount, in the right location. In fact, in order to extract, I remember I've had the privilege to sit with Dr. Passwater, who designed one of the best multiple vitamins. And when I listened to him speak about how much work he did at what milligram amount each substance was added in order for the body to be able to recognize it, break it down, and utilize it, I was completely dumbfounded. I was speechless, and I'm rarely speechless. And I said, wow, look at this, time that this man spent is used to make just a multiple vitamin that actually can be absorbed. And that's my question. All these people selling these substances, what proof do you have you're not just enriching your urine and your toilet?
Now you can test organic acids. You can see lab values change, but with supplementation, with adequate supplementation. But the end game is supplements are just that. They're supplemental. So you have to have the health of the organism, the stress management, the lifestyle, healthy diet. Even, yes, NAD, urolithin A, there's lots of things that can help by, mitochondrial biogenesis, make more mitochondria. But as somebody that's spent a lot of time in the biochemistry, you can't use those things if the other foundations aren't there. They're just not powerful enough. It's kind of like being able to function every day without sleep. I think a lot of us would love to be able to do that, but it's vital to human life for us to sleep and actually sleep for a long time and go into paralysis during REM sleep and all those pieces. And without it, we can't be healthy no matter what you take, and I think that, in my world, especially, it gets very exciting to look at individual supplements or new products or peptides or all those things, and they have application, but it truly is those have to be started, because then it makes it so much better and it actually works. You may not need them, right? You may not need a lot of what you think you're doing.
No, I think bioidentical hormone replacement has become a necessity because of what we've done. But until you fix your microbiome, and that's what I'm saying to young women, and I'm going to answer Tara's question in a minute, to give, the Healthy Trinity twice a day, to take the additional acidophilus vaginally and orally, to get, your gut in order, to get your vaginal tract in order. And by the way, those reoccurring urinary tract infections are caused, by the bugs passing from the rectum into the vaginal tract, into the urinary tract. And by the way, that's, a topic that I will discuss again, that the reoccurring urinary tract infections are caused by something we call persister cells. Remember I told you how smart bacteria are? Well, the immune cells are always looking for proteins, because why? Bacteria are proteinous. Their whole entity is protein. Okay, very little other things. And so what this E. coli does, it builds little mounds of glucose on the wall of the urethra. So when the immune cells are going up and down looking for stuff, they say, oh, this is no harm. This is just a little bit of glucose. There's nothing wrong here. And that's why the antibiotics can't eradicate them, because antibiotics will never eradicate any infectious organism. It just brings them down to less than 10%. Okay, but they're always there. And if they feel any weakness in the body, they're allowed to overgrow. And now I'm going to ask her test, but this is important because uh, a lot of doctors are administering these fecal tests. And I have a whole position paper on fecal testing, and I'm telling them it's completely worthless. It's an indicator, but you have to be asking questions and taking blood samples to validate. But fecal samples should be isolated. Say you suspect the H. pylori infection and you have the genetic material to really find, the H. pylori in this glob of fecal matter, because 40% of your dry weight fecal matter is bacteria. So you have a whole host of bacteria, not that easy to find specific bacteria. And when I see the level of sophistication of their tests, the only thing you're going to find is whatever was fermented in your large intestine before it was expelled as feces. It doesn't tell you anything that's happened further up, especially past the lower small intestine. You don't know what's in the jejunum. You don't know what's in the ileum. You have no idea, because it's not reflected on what comes out of the large intestine.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, the
yeah, go
best, the
ahead.
best, the best way to understand, particularly your upper duodenum and upper small intestine, is truly intestinal biopsy. Unfortunately,
Yeah,
you
and
know.
you don't have to do it, because questionnaire can do it. Because I know when people are out of balance, and I said, look, first do no harm. And I tell every physician and every practitioner, you need to fix the microbiome. When you fix the microbiome, then isolate the other problems. But don't give these what I call designer supplements that are doing one thing, because the body is perfectly capable of reproducing everything it needs. It's only if you have a severe infection that you may want to validate. But for me, paying $400 for a stool test is ridiculous. I do believe in taking the stool sample and seeing if there's blood in it. Yes, that's an indicator that you have a problem, and that is accurate, and it's not that expensive. But having some laboratory perform a ridiculous test, because I work with some of the best microbiologists in the world, and one doctor I know who's doing these stools tests, to do an even halfway adequate test, she charges $1,500. That's the cheapest. It may cost you $2,500. And what are you going to determine when you look at this? Because the colonies of the bacteria shift on your intestinal wall. Every 3 to 5 days, new bacteria grow on your intestinal wall. So everything gets bounced off. So they have to be able to reattach themselves. And that's why I said this is absurd. It's like the 26 blind men feeling the elephant and telling someone else what it looks like. And that's the only analogy I can think of.
I will say some of the newer DNA technology is better. It depends on, and I don't want to get into like the DNA like primers
Mhm.
and things like that. They are getting better. I would say one of the most valuable parts of stool testing, depending on the test, is digestive function markers, is being able to understand bile acid metabolism, like some of the pieces and things of digestion that you really don't have adequate visibility in a blood test to see. It does, I think, have clinical utility, when utilized properly. And I think there's a lot of commercial ones that are out there that are not accurate, that are
Right.
flat out not
But
accurate.
but I'm saying
Yeah.
that, and I'm telling people that the cheapest thing to do is, when you want to do some testing on your patient, give them, what I call the protocol to fix their gut, because I can assure you, with the glyphosate problem as big as it is in the United States,
Mhm.
everybody's microbiome is disrupted,
Mhm.
and especially with the amount of chronic disease we have. So I tell people that should be the number one thing that we do, because I grew up with the greats, with Adele Davis. I taught Bernard Jensen about Lactobacillus acidophilus. My family used to supply it to him. I talked to all the pioneers, the people who sacrificed their lives, their fortunes, so that you can teach people about natural health. And the first thing they all said is, fix your diet and fix your gut. Every last one of them. Do that first and then talk about something else.
No, that's you're speaking functional medicine language 101. It's like it all your health starts in the gut, and it starts with what you can eat, what you can assimilate, what you can digest, what your microbiome does with it before you get a hold of it. All of that is super important, and you can't ignore it.
Yeah, and by the way, I just want to say that the so-called friendly yeast don't do anything to stabilize hormone production or uptake. And plus it has other deleterious functions that I got into another seminar that I did. So forget that. And also, I want to caution, especially young women, of taking these soil organisms. It's very dangerous and has a profound effect on the ability of your intestinal tract to reuptake the hormones. And it can also produce toxins, and those toxins have been implicated in septicemia, bacteremia, the destruction of the cell, the splicing of red blood cells. Very, very, dangerous stuff, because these bacteria are too strong for us to be taking in large numbers. This is what people don't understand, that there's always these lines that are drawn of what our body can tolerate and what our body cannot tolerate. And in the soil organisms, and I do know a lot about them because about 20 years ago, I was an investor in a company that made soil organisms, but not for human beings, for the environment. And that's where it should be, because you can eliminate pesticides by using soil organisms in planting and clearing up the water, especially to be used in those ponds where they grow shrimp and other fish. Instead of putting in antibiotics, you put in the right soil organisms. That's what they were designed for. In other words, you have to use the microbes where they're designed to live, and avoid them where they're not designed to live.
Right. Yeah, I'm not a fan of soil-based organisms. So.
Oh, good. So is there any words that you can tell your young women that come to you? And they're very fortunate because you seem to be a very nice practitioner who has their best interest at heart.
Yeah, I would say, so if they're reproductive age, this is the time that you need to set the groundwork and think of your gut as your garden, and you want to make it nice and healthy and fertile, and that will also set you up for fertility and also just your overall health. And then for the women, I serve a lot of women, and especially women in that 40s to 50s transition, 50s and 60s and beyond. If they're looking at their hormones and other things, they have to address what's going on in the gut. They have to look at how their body processes, excretes, and manages their hormones by looking at what's happening there, because the end point is those things have to get utilized properly, recycled properly, and then excreted when those parts are done. And you can't just indiscriminately sort of ignore that. And we have a long way to go in research. Particularly women's health research. The government just came out with $100 million women's sprint for women's health, to try and bypass the stymied sort of experience in medical research. I mean, we were excluded up until the mid 90s from research, right? So 90% of what we tell women to do has never been studied on women. And so I think as a woman, you want to take that extra step and do a little deeper dive wherever you are on that continuum, so you yourself know that you're healthy and you're doing the right healthy thing for yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm always leery when they say the government is spending money to try to help us.
Yeah, it's an interesting game, because it really has been. I mean, it was as a systemic misogyny, basically, of like to block basically women's research moving forward. And so they're kind of going around NIH and going around Health and Human Services. It's sort of this separate, like, let's separate them from the decision-making process, probably to help move things along. Now, whether that will continue or not, there's just a lot of opportunity here. I think as a researcher, this is why I went back to school to learn as a PhD. I didn't, need another gigantic school bill, but I wanted to contribute. I wanted to contribute to the research. And we just have a long way to go.
Oh, we do. We have a very sick nation. We have a very sick nation. And believe me, if you're infertile, and you just think about going to fertility doctors and getting fertile without fixing your microbiome, you're asking for trouble. Asking for trouble with your pregnancy, with the child that you give birth to. I think, as women, we have to start being more holistic in our approach with other women. And I think we have to mentor the older women, have to mentor the younger women. And this is what we've lost in America, the generational wisdom that women were able to pass on to the next generation. That's not happening.
Yeah.
And we need to change that.
No, that's very true. It's very true. We don't have it. It's a cultural thing.
Well, there's any last words you have to say? And I'd love to talk to you for another hour, but I don't think people are going to listen to us.
I'd say, to the listeners, if they're sitting here and they're going, okay, I understood bits and pieces of that conversation, which I'm sure they did. And I think there's things going on, seek out a functional medicine practitioner, before you go down this road and sort of kind of haphazard do it. If you're looking at supplementation and all those things, and was it Tara that was like, wait, what about NAD? Fix that garden first and then see what's needed after that. I think those things are cool, but whether they actually are really, really instrumental, they may not be if you're really healthy. And then, here's the other thing to think about. Yes, sometimes we have to pay out of pocket to do things to help our health get better because our insurance system is not situated to get you well. It's very much like your car insurance. It doesn't pay for your tire change or your windshield wiper change, but it'll take care of you when you crash. That's what it's designed for, right? So invest now where you are in your health, because that makes the health trajectory and your investment later on where you can use it to do something fun rather than take care of yourself as you fail in health.
Yeah, and Betty, I'm getting a question. Where can these lovely women find you?
Oh, sure. You can find me at bettymurray.com. And that's
physically, where are you located?
Oh, located. I'm in Dallas. I'm in Dallas.
In Dallas.
Yeah. Dallas, Texas. Yeah, a little bit everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, even if they can't come see you physically, the only good thing about the electronic age, they can talk to you on Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah. I have people all over the world. So yeah. Thankfully, technology has made life easier.
Good. Very good. Well, listen, this was an inspiring talk, and I think I should hope everybody learned by it. But I just want to leave this parting thought. We have a problem in our country, and we really need to fix the microbiome. Whether it's in your GI tract, whether it's in your vaginal tract, whether it's on your skin. And, they have all these different practices of medicine. And to leave this last parting thought, a lady that I helped with her serious rosacea, when she asked her dermatologist, do you think it's coming from my gut? And he says, I'm not a gastroenterologist. Why are you asking me this question? 100%. So, but
100%.
Okay, well, good speaking with you. Love you all, ladies. Thank you for your support, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Yes, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Bye-bye now.